People serve at the pleasure of the president. You have a right to not serve at the pleasure of a president you don't want to work for. That's not your job. That's the American taxpayer's job. You've chosen to take that job and serve, once again, at the pleasure of a president. And when I look at people like Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein and Chuck Todd and George Stephanopoulos and David Brooks and E.J. Dionne and all these other high-ranking and highfalutin employees within our federal government, because nobody elected these bureaucrats. Nobody elected Bob Woodward. See, Rev, Bob Woodward's job and Carl Bernstein's job and Chuck Todd's job and George Stephanopoulos' job, their jobs are to report on what the president is doing, not try and dictate what he should or should not do. And to place in almost a heroic stature somebody who is really guilty of not treason. I think that's unfair to compare that to treason. Insubordination, at least. You're serving at the pleasure of the president. Ari Fleischer said it better than I. Ari Fleischer said, if Donald Trump offered him a job, I wouldn't take the job because I don't agree with Donald Trump. I don't want to work for Donald Trump. But once I take the job, there's only one job for me to do, and that's to execute the plan that the president believes in, the agenda, the platform. And here's what's lost in all of this, and here's why this is so important, because it is the most in-your-face reminder of exactly what I've been arguing for the past 5 years. These people don't give a rat's rear end what you believe. You elected a president. Donald Trump didn't steal the election. The Russians didn't get Donald Trump elected. The people spoke. And in the course of our elections, we've always used the Electoral College to determine or make that determination who the president's going to be. And Donald Trump won the Electoral College, not in a landslide, but in very convincing fashion. He broke the blue wall. He won Wisconsin. He won Pennsylvania. He won Michigan. He won North Carolina. He won Florida. He won nearly all of the toss-up states. Now, Bob Woodward doesn't like that. Carl Bernstein doesn't like that. Chuck Todd doesn't like that. George Stephanopoulos doesn't like that. David Brooks doesn't like that. The millions of employees within the federal government, the majority of those don't like that. Doesn't make a damn what you like. The American people are the only people who have a right to choose and dictate the direction of this country, period. Bob Woodward's job is to report on what the American people have chosen that direction to be. Chuck Todd, as a journalist, his job is to report and write about and talk about and verbalize the agenda this president wants to put forth. But this is incredibly different. And this goes back to my argument that we're in the middle of a coup. Foreign governments have coups, and we look at them in a very different way. Hard coup, soft coup, military coup, bureaucratic coup, public coup. I don't know how you say this is not a coup. You've got a guy who admits, or a lady, we don't know who they are, they're anonymous, and we celebrate in some of the population centers, some of the affluent, the New York and Washington Beltway, we kind of celebrate this person as the most heroic individual in the history of modern American government. No, they're a coward. And they're a cheat. And the reason they're cheating is you, the American taxpayer, paying them to do a job. And that job is plain and simple. That job is to carry out and execute the agenda of the president that was duly elected by the American voter. That there is no debate there. There is no, well, let's consider this or let's consider that. No. It ends there. It begins there and it ends there. Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And if you are someone who works in the White House and you don't like that and you don't want to carry out his mission, resign. And then go complain. And then go talk about, because Chuck Todd will have you on every night. George Stephanopoulos will build a statue for you at ABC if you come out of the closet and talk about the misgivings of this president. But shame on you for being the coward that you are and the thief you are, because you're stealing from the American taxpayer. Your job is to execute the agenda of this president, whether you like it or not. And if you find it so deeply offensive, you have a moral responsibility to yourself and the American taxpayer to quit and go find something else to do. But, Rev, it goes back to my fundamental premise and argument. And I wrote this down because I didn't want to misspeak. The people I'm talking about, and there's a list of thousands, probably millions, some more relevant than others. Some believe they matter more than others. They aren't defending our rights. They aren't defending the Constitution. They aren't defending the Declaration of Independence. They aren't defending the virtues of a democracy. They're simply defending Washington the way they want Washington to work. And it goes back to what I've said so many times on this show. They believe it's their government. They believe they're entitled to run this government as they see fit. Public be damned. We're the ignorant deplorables, Reb. We're the ones who made the grave error, the grave mistake, the terrible misjudgment of allowing ourselves to be hoodwinked and of electing this indecent vulgarian of a president. And they're not going to stand for it. Well, it's not their job to decide who's going to stand for what or not. It's simply your job to report on whether this guy's doing a good job or not. And to hear some of the stories about hiding documentation from a president. There should be some high degree of criminality involved in that. And to mislead the president on certain reports because you're afraid he's going to do something that his voters sent him there to do. You see, when you run on draining the swamp, and you run on the game is rigged, you offend a certain subset of people who have rigged the game and are the swamp. And they're not going to roll over. So what we've got to understand, Rev, and I don't think we still understand this. What we've got to understand is how significantly and severely these people have entrenched themselves in positions of influence and power. You didn't elect them. I didn't elect them. Nobody elected them. They appointed themselves, self-appointed themselves, masters of the universe. And Chuck Todd believes he's one of the masters of the universe. Bob Woodward believes that he's entitled to be one of the masters of those universe. Carl Bernstein, George Stephanopoulos, the list goes on. And then there's a subset within that subset of people you don't know and wouldn't recognize if you walked into a convenience store with them. They could sit beside you at the football game Saturday, and you wouldn't have a clue who they are. They believe this government belongs to them. They believe that they are the wisest of the wise. They are the smartest of the smart. They are the most equipped of the equipped. They believe that if we would only get out of the way and let them run this country as they see fit, all of our lives will be better. Well, that ain't how democracy works. That ain't how representative republic works. Here's how it works to you out there. It works like this. We have an election. Someone wins the election. That person who wins the election, however disgusting or offended you may be by that, that person who wins the election goes to Washington with an agenda, and they implement that agenda. And your responsibility as a part of the implementation of that agenda is to do what the president says. And if you don't like doing it and it gets to a point that you're just so uncomfortable with it, you are to resign and go write a book. Or resign and go be an op-ed writer at the New York Times, a non-anonymous op-ed writer. That's how the game's played. That's how the system works. And shame on anybody within earshot of my voice who isn't offended by a coward working in the White House who refuses to execute the president's plan and refuses to resign and continues to be compensated by the American taxpayers' dollars. You're a punk. Hope we didn't a lady because we don't call ladies in the South punks. Mm-hmm. But that's what you are. And shame on you for believing. And listen, and even more shameful than the person doing this, or equally as shameful, are the George Stephanopoulos, Chuck Todd, Bob Woodwards of the world. Those who validate this op-ed as something that is in America's best interest. This is the most dangerous thing America could imagine. Somebody, a subordinate within the organization, not carrying out the will of the duly elected leader of that organization. I mean, imagine if you were told by community broadcasters, hey, here's how we want Good Morning PD to run. You may not like it. You may say, no, I'm not doing that. Guess what? You're either replaced or you do it the way they want it done.
True.
That's the way the world works. You don't have the luxury as a subordinate within the White House to decide whether or not you're going to do what the president said do. That's not your right. And for Bob Woodward and some of these others, I mean, I read some of the things. I mean, Woodward said, you know, we've got a reality White House, and we're trying to save people from the grave mistakes. Who is we? I mean, I got two words for Woodward, because he's been real pronounced, and he wrote this book saying the White House is chaotic and it's out of control. And, well, I mean, why the White House is out of control? The economy's probably as good as it's been in 20 years. I mean, it's unbelievable to me how people even have any faith at all in the Bob Woodwards or the David Brookses. Here's David Brooks's comment from Saturday night. You ready? And here's a Republican, but he's an insider. He's an establishment figure. He doesn't care about ideology. David Brooks could care less about whether a Republican or a Democrat's in the White House. David Brooks could care less about what your taxes are. David Brooks could care less about our intervening in certain places around the world. David Brooks wants Washington to operate the way David Brooks thinks Washington should operate. Same thing with Woodward. Same thing with Bernstein. Same thing with Todd. Forgive me, but it's your job to report on what the president's doing, not dictate what should or shouldn't be done. David Brooks said, how do we rebuild norms of reality after watching past 2 years in shocked horror? Those are his words. He's a Republican, and he says we've had 2 years of shocked horror. No, Mr. Brooks, what we've had is 2 years of wage increase, 2 years of destroying ISIS, 2 years of probably the greatest velocity in GDP growth in 20 to 25 years. That's what we've had in the last 2 years of shocked horror. Now, if you want to go down the road and talk about deficit spending, you know, and not balancing the federal budget, that's fair criticism, very legitimate criticism. It's just unbelievable to me how these people celebrate some worker. I don't care how high ranking they are or not, some worker within the White House who felt compelled to not carry out the president's agenda, make that public. The New York Times prints the op-ed, and a certain subset of the American elite celebrate that. That is the biggest finger in the eye of the Trump voter that has been since he got elected. If you don't believe that there is a high degree or the highest degree imaginable of disrespect they have for you, the Trump voter, you just saw the greatest evidence imaginable in regards to that. They're celebrating someone. And Rev, you can rest assured that if this person were to make themselves known or to make their name public, they would have a ticker tape parade in Washington. They'd have a ticker tape parade in New York. But what I'm arguing, that's not the way the game is played. I think it was the great Barack Obama who said elections have consequences. Well, the consequences of this election is do your job. And if you work in the White House, guess who you work for? You work for the president. You don't have the right to not do what the president says do. That's not within your right. Your rights end with your employment. If you don't like this president, if you don't like this agenda, you are obligated to remove yourself from that place of employment. You know why the guy doesn't or the lady doesn't? Because it's a cushy job. It's probably a real good job. It's probably a job that pays 3, 4, 5 times more than the national average. And you don't want to quit that job because you can't find another one to generate that sort of income. And I hear all these stories about, well, these people are public servants. Nah. These people are workers, just like everybody. Public servant, my butt.